Welcome, everyone. I'm just so excited to welcome you. The Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society has partnered with the Faculty of Information here at the University of Toronto to bring on this remarkable event, the 2024 Ian P. Sharp Lecture featuring Beth, Simone, Noveck. My name is Kelly Lyons, and I'm the Interim Director of the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society, but I'm also a professor in the Faculty of Information, and I have a cross-appointment in the Department of Computer Science. I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording, and so when it comes time for the conversation that we'll have with Beth after her talk, please raise your hand, and someone will bring a microphone to you so that you can be heard up here, but also for the recording. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, Toronto has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, to work, and to convene and come together on this land. I'd like to start by introducing Professor and Dean of the Faculty of Information, Javed Mustafa. Javed.
Have a great crowd this afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to this beautiful facility we are so lucky to have access to and used this afternoon. We are really anticipating no pressure on our speaker at a very exciting and a very enriching talk. I just have a few things to share. This is one of the few public events that the iSchool that we fondly call our Faculty of Information. So I'll take this opportunity just to flag for you as a new dean, as a new member of our faculty, that we're striving to create new partnerships across our university divisions and units that we already have, but to grow them and to deepen them. We are developing partnership. We've held several alumni meet and greet events. We'll continue to do them and engage with our alumni in a much more deliberate and strong way. So I've been so excited to meet many of you already, and I look forward to continue to develop that relationship. We are also continuing our research partnership that we have across various units on campus, but even with universities outside U of T. We are also developing strong partnership and continue to grow our partnership with industry partners and nonprofit sectors. There are major things that are going to happen with the Faculty of Information. Hopefully, if I can survive my term and maintain my energy. One of the most exciting things that we're really working on, I've worked on for the last 7 months or so, is to relaunch, revive, however you want to think about it, create a new Bachelor's of Information degree. And that's going to be very exciting. We have a Bachelor's of Information degree, but it is a second entry degree, but we're converting it to a complete primary entry, first entry, a thriving degree program that provides a pipeline into our faculty. We're also, I'm very excited to announce to you that we have just recently, as recent as last week, signed a contract with the architects firm to launch a major renovation of our beloved Bissell building. And I promise you we'll maintain the, the quirky but interesting look of that building, but we're going to add significant additional space to that building, which we need. I'm also here to let you know that we have just finished our faculty searches for the first round of faculty searches, and we've made 7 offers. All 7 were accepted. I'm very happy about that, and we're going to add new colleagues to our faculty. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are also launching a strategic planning initiative. The goal is to not to do this over many years to get a strategic plan, hopefully by the end of this year, and we will follow that strategic plan as a blueprint to continue to grow and develop our iSchool. We are building the strategic plan on 4 significant pillars. We're going to focus very deeply into maintaining, supporting, developing the best of what we consider that humans have to offer, the creative act that they engage in, how we nurture, support, and curate as well our creative outputs. Curation, as you know, go to the heart, the root of our discipline, which goes back to the ancient times, to our libraries, to archives, museums, that will remain, as long as I'm on the watch, very thriving, important dimensions of our iSchool. And we always have had, especially in the University of Toronto, a significant engagement in the field of communication. You may have some recollection of a scholar we've had many years ago called Marshall McLuhan. We actually are very proud to have the center that he had developed in his term, the Center for Culture and Technology. That's part of our iSchool. And we have continued to grow our scope around communication and media studies. And finally, community is very important in that broader sense of that term. That is not just a community around Toronto, but we want to grow as an international program and grow our reach across the globe. And finally, I'm happy to share with you that we are going to be celebrating our 100 years birthday in a few years, 2028. And by that time, hopefully we'll be ready to open our new portal to the world, which will complete our renovation as well. Thank you very much. I want to turn over the podium now to my colleague Kelly to introduce our esteemed speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Javed. Thank you so much, Javed. So just before we get started, I was going to briefly tell you a bit about the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. It is, and you'll see as I tell you about it, why we are such a great, our partnership with the Faculty of Information is so strong, and that we are happy to be welcoming everyone together as partners for this event. This SRI's mission is to deepen our knowledge of advanced technologies, societies, and what it means to be human by integrating research across traditional boundaries and building human-centered solutions that make a difference. In just 5 years of operation, we have supported 170 researchers from 26 disciplines and 39 faculties and departments, including the Faculty of Information across the University of Toronto. The caliber of the community we brought together is nothing short of outstanding. Our researchers have tremendous impact. They bring us new fields of inquiry and policy solutions. And as AI, as all of you are aware, continues to be an important topic and issue across society, our impact is also growing. So speaking of individuals whose work carries great impact, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our 2024 Ian P. Sharp invited speaker, Professor Beth Simone Noveck. Beth is a professor at Northeastern University, where she directs the Burns Center for Social Change and its partner project, the GovLab. She is a faculty member at the Institute for Experiential AI, School of Law, the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, the College of Arts, Design and Media, the College of Engineering, and an affiliated faculty member of the Curry College of Computer Sciences. Beth's work focuses on using AI to reimagine participatory democracy and strengthen governance. She has spent her career helping institutions incorporate more equitable and open ways of working with new technology. Among her many civic technology projects, she created UnChat, one of the first online platforms for democratic engagement, and Peer-to-Patent to connect scientists to policymakers to improve the patent process. 2 decades before the metaverse, she built Democracy Island in Second Life. And I was in Second Life when that was happening, I remember it. Well, my avatar was in Second Life. I was still in the real world. Previously, Beth served in the White House as the first United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer under President Obama. She founded the White House Open Government Initiative, which worked across government to create policies and platforms such as data.gov and challenge.gov for making federal government more transparent, participatory, and collaborative. She has also served as a senior advisor for open government for UK Prime Minister David Cameron, and from 2018 to 2021 as a member of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's Digital Council. Appointed the State of New Jersey's first Chief Innovation Officer, Beth and her team are using new technology to improve equitable government delivery of services. The Office of Innovation has worked with partner agencies to modernize unemployment insurance, provide a whole-of-government response to COVID, deliver everything needed to start, run, and grow a business, and use open data to provide training information to job seekers and improve uptake of benefits, services, and permits. She also served as chair of the State of New Jersey's Future of Work Task Force. Beth is the author of several books, including Solving Public Problems, How to Fix Our Government and Change Our World, published in 2021 by Yale Press. Her latest book is Democracy Rebooted, How AI Can Save Democracy. Beth was named one of Foreign Policy 100, one of the Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business, and one of the top women in technology by Huffington Post, one of the world's 100 most influential academics in government by Apolitical, and last October she was awarded an honorary degree from the University of Geneva. We're extremely lucky and honored to have her here with us today to deliver her talk entitled From Ballots to Bots, AI's Transformative Role in Democratic Societies. Please join me in welcoming Beth to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With an introduction that long, I think we're done. I don't have to say anything else. We're just getting up some slides here so that we're ready to go. Excellent. So I want to thank you very much, Kelly, for that fulsome introduction, and Javed, that was unbelievably impressive, and I'm just so delighted to be here. And I also want to thank Eitan for all of his help in actually getting me here and making sure that everything came off so smoothly. And of course, to IP Sharp Associates Ltd, now Thomson Reuters Company, which established this magnificent lectureship. I think it is just fantastic to have these kinds of occasions for people to come together as a community, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we get to have together today. So, John Quincy Adams said now more than 200 years ago that democracy never lasts long, it soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. Now, it's not surprising that he penned these words at a time when the US was still battling the British in the War of 1812 and suffering the economic consequences, that its two major political parties were increasingly at odds with one another, and the North and the South were, of course, beginning what would become the friction that led to the Civil War in intensifying disagreements about slavery. So it was no wonder in this period in the fledgling democracy that he worried about the sustainability of democracy. After all, it was still a very new experiment. And yet he turned out to be wrong. And of course, we have enjoyed 200 plus years, not just in America, we've enjoyed 200 plus years of strong democracy, growing democracies around the world. It started in this period with one democracy and of course spread everywhere around the world. But now we're in a very different moment in time, where this quote perhaps seems a little too apropos, a little too apt in the moment in which we are at the moment. And we're asking ourselves again, are we on the brink? Are we on the precipice? And many people think that, in fact, we are. There are a record low percentage of Americans that are satisfied with the way that democracy is working in the US, as you can see from here. When we think about whether people, if we think about democracy, and I'll talk a little bit about this more, whether we think about this as being really about trust in government as well as trust in democracy, those numbers are also extraordinarily low, not just in the US, but really around the world. That trust in government is not only low, but it's declining everywhere. And in the US in particular, people really feel, if you ask them whether they trust government to do what's right, and depending on what part of government we're talking about, but the numbers, especially for the federal government, are incredibly abysmal. It is not good. And as we embark on this electoral season, again, not just in the US, but around the world, but surely in the US, the narrative is being billed as really that of existential crisis, that the fate of democracy hangs in the balance against what might come otherwise. And again, it's not just an American story, it's a very global story where there is a loss of faith, both in democracy and in government globally, with countries around the world, again, suffering from this question of loss of faith. And even here in Canada, which we in the US always like to think of as our better angel and our better neighbor, those numbers, at least when I look at this trust number for the federal parliament, is still extremely low and getting lower. So we have this question about what we're going to do. And of course, I want to preface this by saying that what we mean by democracy, and we may talk about this, is a very controversial term still. On the one hand, it represents a set of ideals, a kind of future set of values, a future state that we care about. On the other hand, it's also about a set of political institutions, the here and now. And we don't have a lot of agreement about what we mean by it, or even sometimes the kind of democracy that we are striving for. But let me say, for purposes of this talk, I will just sort of give us a little bit the basic definition that Robert Dahl, the famous Yale political theorist, who's considered by many to be one of, if not the preeminent theorist of democracy, that he attributes to democracy these characteristics. And some of them will not come as any surprise to you: free, fair, and frequent elections, but also so voting being very much the hallmark and the sine qua non of Republican democracy, of representative democracy. But there also is a component about public participation in agenda setting and notions of inclusion and plurality that define this. But by any one of these definitions or measures, and again, we can talk about other people's definitions and which ones we like, we're not doing very well. So elections, at least in the US, we are very seriously worried about the problem of election subversion, about rising rates of violence against poll workers who are turning over in vast numbers in the US because they are afraid to do their job. And there is both an actual concern and, to some extent, a manufactured narrative about the lack of capacity and integrity of our elections. When we talk about information, the informational basis of our democracy, we only have to look to social media to recognize, as Anne Applebaum said, social media is democracy's dumpster fire. We are seeing proliferating rates of disinformation and misinformation that give us all pause. And I might add, is something we're worried about very much getting worse in the AI age. Voting is something we've always worried about. We've always worried about whether voting even matters. And there's been a lot that's been written about the rationality of voting, positing that, in fact, it matters very little. I had an election in my town yesterday. This morning, I woke up to find that none of my candidates were elected. Unfortunately, I do think my vote mattered in that case, but I think there are many who would suggest that that is not the case. And of course, we are worried globally about the rise of populist strongmen who are capitalizing off of this fear, off of this sense of crisis, to position themselves as the solution, to position themselves essentially as the saviors, not just of our democracy, but of our society. So part of this, I think, stems from a real sense of frustration about our own ability to affect the change in our political systems. So globally, again, here, and these are some OECD numbers here, half say that the political system does not let them have a say in decision-making. There's lots of empirical data which shows that average citizens have, at least in the US, have little or no influence on the way that policy is made, on the way that law is made. There's really very little way for us to engage in the traditional sense of democratic self-governance that we put at the center of our democracy. and we only have to look around us at what's going on in the world, whatever your position on the situation in the Middle East, I think we can agree that today's young people feel an extraordinary sense of frustration about their ability to affect change, which is what's causing them to take to the streets, which is what's causing them to set up their encampments, again, often with a great sense of frustration that they're not able to do much of anything at all to affect change in the world. So, where does all this leave us? I would put to you that at its root, the crisis of democracy that we are experiencing is ultimately a crisis of governance. It is a crisis of institutional effectiveness. Our institutions today do not operate as well as they need to, are not as effective as they need to be at solving the tremendous problems that we are confronting as a society. Now, we have lots of reform proposals that are out there about how to fix our institutions, but many of those proposals, unfortunately, many of the most talked about proposals, like eliminating the Electoral College in the US, or I was reading an article this week about how we should get rid of the Senate, or we should enlarge the US Congress. I'm going to use a lot of American examples here, my apologies. Most of these are, best case, slow, worst case, completely impossible, or at least not in my lifetime. Are we going to do things like eliminate the US Senate or even eliminate the Electoral College? So I would put to us that we have an opportunity with AI to actually do something in my lifetime, not just in my lifetime, but now, to use AI to actually upgrade the capacity of our institutions to solve our hardest problems. We can do better, and we can tackle this crisis of democracy by upgrading our institutions with AI. Now, why is that the case? AI does a lot of great things for us, and I'm curious here in the room, how many people here, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or one of the other popular generative AI platforms, how many people here are using generative AI on a daily basis? A very large number of hands, relatively speaking. That is a big change. Obviously, these things have only been around for a year. As we know, these are the fastest growing technologies in history. But I would say the uptake that's quite a pleasant surprise to see that. So AI does more than any other technology we've ever seen, not just to change how we do things. We've had a lot of tools like levers and calculators and other things that do great stuff that really help us to work differently. These really help us to think in completely different ways. And it's not just the fact that we can create new content with these tools, that we can go on ChatGPT and spit out a birthday card or a poem or a bedtime story for our children. By the way, great use for it. It's really, really good at actually helping us to analyze content, to synthesize large amounts of information, to draw out insight and knowledge, not just from text, from numbers, as well as from pictures. By the way, so you can take a picture of your refrigerator tonight and ask ChatGPT, what should I make for dinner? And it will tell you that and give you the recipe. Not because it's just good at creating information, but again, it's synthesizing and analyzing information, pulling together various strands of knowledge, and allowing us to get smarter faster. And as we move forward, and we begin to adopt not just generative AI, but AI agents. That is to say, technology that automates the process of prompting our generative AI. So instead of going in and typing, what should I have for dinner, or write me a poem, we can now create agents that will do this, as I'll talk about more in a minute. I'll show a little bit more of this, that can actually automate the process and do tasks for us. This opens up a whole new set of vistas. And before you ask me about hallucinations, which we can talk about, remember that today's technology is arguably the worst technology we will ever see. These tools are a year old, and they're only going to get better. They've gotten better over the last year, and they're going to get better as we move along. So AI, I put to you, can change the way our institutions relate to information, to the public, and to those outside of our institutions, and to how our institutions make decisions. And those are three areas where we're desperately in need of these upgrades. Right now, we have outdated institutions that are capable of making only very limited use of information, that operate still very much behind closed doors, and that are not doing and deciding, whoops, sorry, spelling mistake, as well as they ought to. But AI can help us make light work of information, and they can help us to create new kinds of public engagement, and they can help us speed up and improve the quality of our decision making, or at least that's what I hope to show you a bit more of today in some examples. So what I want to do is for a few minutes go through three of our big sort of institutions of democracy, if you will, the kind of basics here of Congress, the executive, or Parliament, the executive, and the courts, and show some examples about the way AI is already helping to transform our institutions. So I don't have to tell you, and I'll be interested to hear what your views are about the situation in Canada, but in the US, Congress is really at its nadir in terms of productivity. It is unproductive, it is under-resourced, and our laws, frankly, are, when we make them, which is increasingly rarely, are not well tailored to the problems they're trying to solve. So part of what's going on here, and yes, there are many issues with what's going on in politics in America and globally, but part of what's going on here is that institutionally, we have the population growing, the number of issues are getting more complicated and bigger, and the institution is actually shrinking. The institution is dramatically under-resourced. So what's happened is Congress is actually run by a bunch of 22-year-olds because those are the only people, frankly, who can afford to work there because the rates of pay are so low. They gave everybody a pay bump now to put them at $45,000. Think about living in Washington, D.C., a major U.S. capital, on $45,000. No one can afford to work there. And as a result, the staff is increasingly young. The staff turns over incredibly quickly. And the staff is also dramatically declining. In fact, Congress has not significantly upgraded its own capacity since the 1970s. It has fewer staff today than it did in 1980. And congressional committees, which is where all the work of sort of lawmaking really gets done, it's really the engine of policymaking and of oversight, they have fewer staff today than they did then. So the numbers are low and getting lower despite the growing size of our population. And the amount that Congress actually spends on itself is a minuscule fraction of the budget. And most of that money is spent only on the building and on the police force, not actually on any kind of R&D or upgrade to the institution and how it works. Last week, the New York Times, in its magazine section and online, did a piece where they interviewed former congressmen, and here are the words that they used to describe the current state of Congress. Okay, now to the good stuff. So what's happening, or what could we do differently? So look at what's going on in California, where they have a project called Cal Matters, where they've used AI now to ingest every word uttered in public hearings, every dollar given to a politician, every bill that's been introduced, every vote that's been taken. So that now, and this is a brand new project, they're doing their launch actually next week, which I'm looking forward to. So now you can go in and actually see what it is that any one of the legislators are doing or working on. You can look up by topic what the law is and how it's evolving. So it gives us just the beginning of a snapshot of the kind of transparency we could have into the workings of our legislature. In Brazil, and by the way, other countries far ahead of where we are in North America, Brazil, this is the Pro tool, which has been created by the back office staff of the Brazilian Senate, where they have ingested all of their laws into an AI using ChatGPT, and now you can go in and query it, and it's used to help lawmakers write better laws that are in the very first place at least stylistically aligned to the rules of legislative drafting, but it's meant to increase the clarity, the precision, and actually the logical order in which their laws are written to create better quality laws. Italy is doing something similar. They're using AI to manage the amendment process. Right now, the amendment process, as in most places, is a completely chaotic free-for-all, where people are introducing amendments left and right, often with the aim of stalling the process or sneaking in their little piece of pork to get their own, thing funded. Very little transparency, tremendously chaotic, and again, very hard to follow what's going on in that process. So in Italy, they are using AI to be able to sort those amendments, to be able to create greater transparency, and improve the drafting process. Let's keep going. If we talk about not just the relationship to information in the form of text, but let's talk about the very specific form of information, which is actually engagement with the information they get from the public. Right now, if you talk about how most legislatures work, they're working entirely behind closed doors. There is no real mechanism for collaboration. There is no way to draw insights from what the public knows or its experiences, which is why lobbyists have such an unfair advantage in the process. If anything, the big challenge is the public is clamoring at the gates, calling their legislator, sending in faxes, sending in tweets, and the staff, at least in the US Congress, is completely overwhelmed by this communication. Most of their time is spent on staff, that is spent on responding to communication, but not on doing anything about it. So there's a really interesting set of experiments, a very early experiment that was run by these two researchers, Sarah Krebs and Maurice Yakesh, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, where they said, what would happen if we used AI to respond to constituent inquiries? And so they did a randomized control trial, several of them actually, in which they said, let's give people the normal response they get from the 22-year-old staffer who is cutting and pasting something and sending it to them, and then let's use AI to give people a response to their question that's actually more personalized, drafted by the AI. And in fact, what happened is people vastly preferred the responses drafted by AI. And it was disclosed. You were getting a response drafted by AI, and people still said, I'd rather have, and I trust more, the response that's actually responsive to my inquiry than the standard cut and paste, thank you for contacting your legislator. And it dramatically has the potential then to free up staff time to actually work on the inquiries as opposed to just responding to them. My own students in a program I run called AI for Impact, where students are building AI for government agencies. Last semester, we did a project for a sitting member of Congress to build what we think is the first chatbot that was ever created. And we're now talking to that member next week to talk about how we can move forward and really implement such a tool that has ingested all of that member's position papers, all of his previous work, so that the chatbot can both respond to questions and do so in a way which is consistent with the viewpoints of that congressman. So imagine, for example, if now, instead of just managing the incoming flow from the people calling to ask about their visa, or where is my benefit check, or I didn't like the way you voted on the bill, imagine if a member of parliament or Congress or a city council or a legislator could actually reach out to every constituent for 10 minutes and listen to what they had to say. That is an unthinkable. I can't even do the math. I can't do that arithmetic very well to imagine what that would involve. It's a complete mathematical impossibility today if we were to try to do that. When you consider that in the US, every member of the House of Representatives represents, I have to look at my notes here, 747,184 people on average. That is a staggering increase from what it used to be. So if everybody got to speak, it would be an impossible length of time. Now imagine if you saw Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, if you saw the conversation he posted online last week between real Reid Hoffman on the, can you guess which one is real Reid Hoffman? Which is AI Reid Hoffman? Can you tell? If you saw the video, you would know this. You're giving me which one? This is which? That's AI? Incorrect. That is AI. That's the AI Reid Hoffman. That's real Reid Hoffman. Now, when you're Reid Hoffman and you have all the money in the world, you can afford a very fancy avatar like this. Your AI is going to look pretty good. But it's not far away for any one of us to have AI me. So imagine if AI parliamentarian, AI legislator, AI politician could go out and have a conversation with people, ingest what they're saying, and be able then to summarize it and to listen to it. Last example I want to give here on the legislative side, and this one is a little harder to show you, but I would want to try to describe it. So I mentioned before the idea of AI agents. So we are using AI agents in some work that we are doing with a group called Citizens Foundation, a nonprofit tech nonprofit out of Iceland, to do policy making using AI agents. And simply put, what we're doing is feeding the AI with a problem. In this case, the last slide I showed you was a question about literacy in the US, which on average, the average fourth grader now in the US, we've got literacy competence is, it's under 40%. I think 32% is the number on average at which our fourth graders read. It's a pretty staggeringly depressing figure. But what we did was we fed the AI with this problem, and then we said, we want you to do the research for us on searching for all the root causes of this literacy challenge. So simply put, what we're essentially doing when I talk about an AI agent and I talk about doing that research, it's not just tell me what the root causes are of literacy. It's run that 30,000 times and then compare all the results that you're getting and do that both for problems and for solutions. And what we're doing is going out and asking AI, and then we're going out with what we learn from AI and asking humans. Then we take what we learn from the humans, we again ask the AI, and we're doing this as a way to more quickly arrive at useful policy solutions. And since this was a very unsatisfying explanation, I'll point you to two things, a short article in Fast Company about this process and how we've used it to work on solutions to the challenge of election subversion, and a free course that we're putting up online, which should be ready by the end of this month, called Fast Field Scanning, which talks exactly about how to use AI to find policy solutions. So imagine if our politicians, if our legislatures, if our institutions could go out and use AI to get smarter, faster about how we make decisions in ways that align the solutions we're developing to the problems. So I would say we need a systematic strategy for how we think about using AI in our institutions. And that, by the way, is not the case today. Right now, if you talk about the US Congress using AI, it's the odd staffer using it to write a first draft of a speech. There's a bunch of different pilot projects. This is in contrast to a number of other countries that are saying systematically, how do we go about improving the capacity of our institution using AI? What might we do with it? All right, let me go on to a few more examples from other parts of government. So obviously we have the executive, which has also does regulatory rulemaking, it does make policy, but also is responsible for delivering services to residents, and this is where we're seeing perhaps the most degradation of capacity. So book after book complains about the ability of our institutions to actually give people the benefit check, give people the service to which they're entitled, and we know what the consequence is when we fail to do that in terms of the loss of trust in government, the lack of faith in government, and the real harms to people's lives when they don't get the benefits to which they are actually entitled. So there's a reason that this is happening. It's not accidental, and there's actually been a systematic effort in the US and elsewhere to really eviscerate the capacity of government that has been a political agenda since the Reagan era. But the result of which is we have, again, growing numbers of population, increasing numbers of bureaucracies and agencies and services to deliver and problems to solve with fewer and fewer people. In the US, the federal government is, I hope you can, it's big enough for you to see, but you can get a sense of the proportions here. The government is getting smaller, it isn't getting bigger. And in that government, at least at the federal level, if you want to talk about our ability to use the latest tools and bells and whistles to do things better, look at the age gap that we're looking at in terms of people who engage in government service. Now, it's not a one-for-one proxy. You know, there are plenty of older people who know a lot about technology, but at least the people who are working in government did not go to school where they learned about the internet, let alone learning about AI. And the situation is worse at the state, at the regional, at the provincial, at the local level where governments are less resourced. This has very serious consequences. So just to take a couple of examples here, FDA study that came out last year, our ability to actually recall tainted food in the US is not going very well. It takes an extremely long time, and that leads to deaths. That leads to hospitalizations. There are real consequences when we cannot inspect our food supply. When we have a situation such as the recall on Abbott baby food that happened a year or two ago, the issue was looked at, what was going on here with government's ability to actually inspect the safety of baby food? So this news outlet said, no, there's not a shortage of staff, by which they should have said, in fact, the staff isn't shrinking at the FDA. But what they failed to say is, what's happening is that only 9 people work in the division that's responsible for North America's supply of baby food. That is an unacceptable situation. And the number of people, if I gave you numbers for 1,200 people responsibly for overseeing the safety of the entirety of America's food supply, very, very difficult. Okay, so what do we do about it? Well, enter AI. In California, which has been suffering from the terrific problem of wildfires, they've introduced AI now, and instead of responding to fires after the fact, that advanced AI can look at a camera. They have 150 different cameras scanning forests and whatnot, and the AI, faster than humans, say, that is a fire about to break out. 77 wildfires in the last year have been stopped because AI alerted human authorities to respond to those fires faster, avoiding a serious outbreak problem. We have the opportunity now to create more conversational government, to create a better relationship between government and governed, so that even in a town like Prospect Park, New Jersey, again, this involves another number, I have to look, I don't remember numbers, 6,245 people live in Prospect Park, New Jersey, yet you can transact with government, get information about services 24/7, because their mayor, city administrator, the youngest one in history, built an AI chatbot, which tells you, you can go on and figure out, how do I get a marriage license from the town, or when is the town hall open, or how do I transact? And now we're going to see more and more of this use of chatbots providing information to people 24/7 instead of 9 to 5 having to go to a government office. Creates the opportunity now not just to deliver services as we've done for many years, but to deliver personalized services. So in New Jersey, the team I used to run had built this system called mycareer.nj.gov, where I can upload my CV, my resume, and it will uses AI to extract data from my resume, matches it to data about in-demand jobs, and tells me what kind of training I might like to take, what kind of jobs are available to me, and gives me coaching about my career. Terrifically important in a world in which most of that information is only available from commercial outlets interested in selling me something. This is a government providing a personalized service for me as a job seeker, trying to figure out what training I should take, using AI and the data that government collects. Another project, brand new. I know very little about it, and I'm trying to find out more. Ohio just announced very recently that they were introducing AI, feeding it with all of their regulations to enable the system to find duplicative regulations and reduce the burden on businesses and on individuals from compliance. Let's go forward to talk about that public engagement piece of things. So cities and jurisdictions like Hamburg, who are now with their DPAS system, using AI to invite citizen comment on how they do urban planning, and now to synthesize and summarize all of the comments that they're getting and sorting them geographically so they can send the right comments to the right places to be used for urban planning and for transportation. In the UK, they're looking at the same thing. How do we summarize and sort citizen input? But they've nicely quantified it. They said, look, before, if we wanted to go out and talk to 30,000 residents and ask for comments, it would take us 25 people to be able to actually listen to what people were saying. Now we can actually dramatically reduce that cost and make that more efficient. So similarly, on the executive side, we need a systematic agenda for what we're doing in the same way that we do on the legislative side. Lastly, let's talk about courts. Very similar kinds of challenges. Oops, I think my challenge slide is, where'd my challenge slide? There it goes. You know, I just heard on the news on my way over here about the story, the graph on the left was in the news this morning. Terrific backlog of immigration hearings in the US, and that comes with severe political consequences that we cannot process requests for asylum fast enough. We cannot review these cases, and people are stuck in limbo with serious consequences. And it's making very difficult for us, you know, across a wide range of issues. Courts are having a hard time dealing with the influx of information and litigation that's coming in. So what do we do about this? Well, when we can analyze this data, we can do things like these Northwestern researchers did, looking at the data from proceedings in the Supreme Court. This is not a backlog problem, this is a different problem. What they discovered is that male Supreme Court justices were interrupting female Supreme Court justices all the time. And their later research shows that male Supreme Court justices also interrupt female lawyers all the time. Fast forward, what that led to is a change in the rules for the US Supreme Court to change the way questions are asked. Now, in order of seniority, judges ask questions one at a time in a hearing designed to create more equity in these processes. As a little side note, what this led to is the fact that Clarence Thomas, who didn't ask a question for something like 20 years, now actually has to ask a question because it's his turn, and what's he gonna say? So he now has to ask a question because they go down the line and ask one at a time. But there are courts now turning to AI to be able to completely rethink how they're doing things, again, by ingesting large quantities of information, allowing courts to be able, and judges in particular, to be able to better process the information that they're getting in. So the judiciary, like the legal system in general, is really just a very big text processing institution. So language, documents, text, that's the raw material that they work with. And of course, that's what generative AI is really good at processing. And Germany is now moving wholesale to adopt the use of AI across its court system, allowing for reduced processing time because they are improving the ability of judges to analyze large dockets. We're also seeing things like, both in courts and in some legislatures, the use of AI to do transcription of hearings. What that allows for is greater accessibility, instantaneous translation, which makes the system more accessible to people whose native language may not be the predominant language or the majority language in the country. So now, for example, in India, in their now digital Sansad, they're translating into 22 languages in real time, and their Supreme Court into 18 languages. Lastly, it is helping us, the beginnings of which with decision-making in courts in somewhat controversial ways, right? So there are justices turning to AI, as this Colombian judge did, when he admitted that he used ChatGPT to help him when deciding whether an autistic child's insurance should cover all the costs of his medical treatment. That was the question that was at issue, but he was able to use precedent from previous rulings to support the decision that he made in Cartagena. So, and he included in his decision his conversations with ChatGPT in order to have full transparency. So again, for courts, we want to think about, as the Chief Justice of the Singapore Supreme Court has said, we want to think about the ways that we can safely, securely, and responsibly use AI to help us manage this welter of text that courts deal with, and to make courts more efficient, fairer, more participatory, more transparent. And I would say here too, we have an agenda for what we need to do in our court system. Okay, let me close by saying there are obviously risks. And I'm sure in our conversation we will get into a lot of them. But let me just point out 2 or 3 before I wrap up. The first is that, to bastardize the Churchill phrase, AI needs to be on tap, but not on top. We need to be careful about not ceding our responsibility, our decision-making authority, our power just to AI. We saw what happened, if you've seen the movie, on Netflix about the British Post Office scandal, where in fact, in the British Post Office, a computer system, this is not AI, but a computer system declared that sub-postmasters were embezzling money. There was plenty of evidence that the computer system was the problem, not the people, and yet leadership dug its heels in and said, no, 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 the computer system has to be right. People not only went to jail for this, they committed suicide before it was actually revealed that the tech was to blame, not the humans in this case. So there is a risk if we don't do this in the right way. But there also is a risk when we're focused on the wrong research, when we're focused on asking the wrong questions. And I would say that a lot of what we're doing now in terms of how we're looking at AI suffers from 2 major problems. One is that we're very, very focused on the question of how AI relates to me and not how it relates to us. So this question of what does it mean for our institutions? But even then, when we're talking about AI and its impact on our democracy, we are all too often looking at how we can use AI to change how we talk to one another, but not how we actually take action, not how we do and not how we decide. And that is the outgrowth, that is not a feature of AI, that's an outgrowth of a very long tradition, a backlash against the citizen movements of the 1960s that has led us to view with disdain and suspicion the role of ordinary people in politics and in decision-making. And so we're seeing a lot of, again, attention to some processes that really have very, very few outcomes. And again, a lot of which are described often by this term of citizen assemblies, sortition, deliberative polling. Again, there are many wonderful things about these efforts to get communities of people together, but they do not spend enough time and attention on asking how can we translate citizen power, citizen conversation into citizen power? How can we connect deliberation to institutions and use AI to actually make the public more powerful in how we make decisions. So I think, and I sort of like this quote, which I read over the weekend from one of these 1960s activists by the name of Robert Ross, who talks about the fact that what democracy is about is not just about holding an idea, about holding a position or an opinion. It's really about this idea of taking action. It's really about what we can do together, when we can do something to be powerful in the world. And I think given the challenges that we are facing, which are existential in nature, it is extraordinarily important that we start to invest in and look at this question of how we can actually use AI to help us create more effective institutions. Strong, transparent, effective institutions matter to the flourishing of democracy. Institutions need to be able to use information to engage the public in more direct ways, in ways that give the public power to be democratic institutions, and need to be able to make more effective, more legitimate decisions. So we can and we urgently need to use AI to help us to do this. But if we're to reboot our democracy, if we're to avert the crisis on which we stand the precipice, of which we stand on the precipice, we do need to start thinking about how to use AI to upgrade our institutions. Democracy hangs in the balance. Thank you.
So we'll go sit.
The slides?
Thank you so much, Beth. Beth and I thought that for the Q&A part, to make it feel very conversation-y, we would sit together here on the stage and welcome your input and comments. Thank you so much. It was really an amazing talk. Maybe I'll just open it up. Remember, get ready to put your hand up and we'll send a microphone over. But I was wondering how you are, I'm just so inspired by your positive perspective and outlook, and how you really have been able to turn that into making a difference and having an impact. And how do we, I'm struck by the numbers of young people that I speak to who feel very disenfranchised and feel that there's not a lot of hope for the future of democracy and other things. How do we share this positive and inspiring perspective with our young people?
Well, of course, the classic academic answer is read my book, which I have to write first. So you are my test case. So I'm really interested in you are going to help me to write this book, because I do think it is a very hopeful, positive story, or could be. But there is no reason it has to turn out this way. And in fact, everything that we read suggests that AI will do the exact opposite for our democracy. Misinformation, disinformation, deep fakes, hallucinations, bias, et cetera, et cetera. There is great concern. And I am very frustrated by the powerlessness that I see reflected in the protests that are breaking out around us, that people are so hungry to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the wonderful and exciting thing about AI, generative AI in particular, is because these technologies are driven by language, they are not the exclusive domain of people who have a computer science degree. So you can, with plain language, and that doesn't mean English, it's not as good in other languages, but with plain language, you can tell it to do something for you. You can build something. And I will just say that for 20 years now, I have been teaching and working with students to build tech for governments and for civic organizations. This past Friday, just a few days ago, I saw the tools that my students this semester are building. In 20 years, I have never seen anything as good as what I saw now.
Fabulous.
Because with generative AI, they can make progress so much faster. So I have students who have built a chatbot for training engineers who are joining the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, which is unable to educate incoming employees fast enough. Or they built a tool to help educate the people answering the phone in the Department of Health so they can get up-to-date information about policies and give citizens correct answers. I have a team that's building a tool that translates and summarizes your individualized education program, which is the document you receive from your school district if your child has a disability. Those are 50-plus page PDFs, and if you don't, if you're a normal mortal, you can't read them. If you don't speak English or you're low literacy, it's an impossibility. Now a parent can upload the document on their phone and then ask questions and get an answer in their native language. It was mind-blowing to see what they've been able to do so quickly. So I'm very excited.
Thank you.
Now you'll tell me why I shouldn't be.
Please. I'm taking notes, by the way, for my course I'm teaching in the fall in the Faculty of Information.
I'm going to take notes too. So I'm ready. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Thank you for your really hopeful, optimistic predictions. I'd like you to address, if you could, the unintended consequences and the fact that AI, because it's been ingesting so much, and we've seen how it affects marginalized populations, what steps are being taken and or could be taken to, I guess, balance the effects for populations and constituents who traditionally and consistently aren't really being addressed?
So what does your sign say here, Javed? What does it say? Human-centered solutions?
That's SRI.
What?
That's SRI.
That's SRI,
Yeah.
sorry, not the department. Okay, the department is not human-centered.
We partner on that.
The school, sorry. I think the lesson that we've learned for many years now about needing to build tools with the communities for whom they are intended instead of at people or for people is a lesson we need to bring into the world of AI. There's a wonderful researcher at University of Maryland named Ben Schneiderman who's written a book called Human-Centered AI, and he runs a Google group with now hundreds of people who are interested in this question of human-centered AI. But the great part about these tools, again, is I think they're so much more accessible than earlier technologies have been. So we need to invest to some extent in education, as many other countries are doing, Finland, India, Japan, Malaysia, all making investments in educating the whole of the population, not just university students. So we need to invest in broader scale education about what these tools are, and then to engage people in helping to develop and build things. The tool I just mentioned that summarizes and translates the document you get when your child has a disability is entirely being built by a network of Spanish-speaking parents and my students and a activist group that organizes parents for parent activism and parent power. And it's all being done by them. So it's community-centered and community-focused. Now, I would be naive if I didn't mention, and I won't prolong the answer too much, but we need to talk about where these tools come from and that they're all commercial in nature and that they are run by companies whose goal it is to make a profit. So there are challenges about the fact that these are all private and privatizing technologies, but at least in our uses of them, we need to be democratic in how we build these tools, and we need to be driven by public purpose in what we do, which includes being collaborators in the co-design of solutions, as human-centered design has always taught us. But we are not there yet.
Stephen, I think it's you.
Hi. Thank you so much. I am too encouraged by your positivity. What worries me, having done a lot of giant ingestions, is its past knowledge and its past solutions. And some of the research right now is showing that AI can't predict, other than the next word, predict from, it can go from A to B, but it can't go make a cognitive leap from A to T. And so I'd like to ask you to explore a little bit where you think the research needs to go around our basic humanity of taking creative cognitive leaps to solve new problems that we didn't know existed, or to take a new lens on old problems like poverty, climate change, and that sort of stuff.
These are both great questions, and I think I would give two answers to this, although I suspect you have a third that's going to be better, which I'd love to hear. The first is, so I'm personally interested in this question of how we combine artificial intelligence and collective intelligence, or human engagement and artificial intelligence. And we've seen some of this research, people like Karim Lakhani or Ethan Malik, doing this work on sort of what kinds of problems AI is good at solving and what kinds of workers become more productive with AI. And there are various studies that come out and say, AI is more innovative or people are more innovative. I've seen both of those conclusions from, and all of this is very new research. So I think to your point, it's very interesting to see what kind of solutions or ideas AI spits out, but there are limits to its creativity, and that's why asking humans always has to be part of the equation. So I think the research on how we combine these two, what is the interface between the two, how do I go between these two different sort of, almost dimensions, if you will, and what's the right order of things, to me is a really, really interesting question that we haven't tested enough of yet in the wild, how we actually do that. I think the other question, we're sort of trying to look at this question of how AI agents, when you steer them adequately and give them criteria, can actually help to evaluate its own information. So the great thing about AI agents and the ability to run fast, so many queries so quickly is I can ask, which of these solutions is the cheapest? Which of these solutions is actually the most relevant for people of this income level? Which one of these solutions is better for women? Which one of these solutions is better for people in this region or that region? I just have the ability to kind of get answers, to kind of slice and dice the information so many ways, so much more quickly. And we've been experimenting with both using genetic algorithms to allow the AI to evolve its own answers to those questions, and the application of what's sometimes called ELO scoring to allow it to run comparisons against two answers. So it can give me hundreds of answers, but it has to say, okay, I have to compare them if I'm trying to ask the question which is cheaper or which is faster, which is better. And there is no such thing as the solution. It really depends on what I'm trying to do and what question I'm trying to answer. And the solution for a local government is a different solution than for a philanthropy or for an international organization. So what I like is the fact that we can just do a lot of information processing and use that to inform in the end how we make decisions.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Noveck. As a former IP Sharp Associates employee, I'm very happy to have heard your talk in this series. I'd like to ask you to go back to the question of trust, which came up in several different guises during your talk. People not trusting government, people not trusting political data, but also people don't trust AI-generated material for very good reasons. So why should we trust AI when government uses it? How are we going to make products of government that use AI more trustworthy? And I ask this as an academic. I have my peer review processes and reputations of journals and other things, so I have a reputation system to rely on. I don't have a reputation system for government.
So I hear you that two wrongs don't make a right. They don't like AI, they don't like government, and the two together is doesn't, is more bad things. So, we have to, it's a question. I think, I will, like ChatGPT, I will say things with great certainty that may indeed be a hallucination in my mind, but I am nothing if not optimistic. I do think that, number one, we have to ask what we're comparing it to, right? So if you look at the research that those Cornell folks were doing about using AI to change how members of Congress respond to constituents. Right now, the response from your member of Congress is so, I mean, you're lucky to get a response, and if you get a response, it's probably just a form letter that's been cut and pasted. So hence the reaction, at least, and it was one experiment, was extraordinarily positive because of what it was compared against. So that's one thing. The second question is whether transparency makes a difference. Like if I know that the response is from AI, does that increase my trust level? And again, I think that's something that we need to measure and how people respond to it. But I do think that what we're going to see a lot of, and I'm about to say something uncharacteristically negative, is what we're going to see a lot of, we're already seeing it with companies and we're going to see it with governments, is bad intention in how we're using AI. Right, so in the end, it's a tool, and it depends on how I use it. If what I want to do is use these tools to replace workers and get rid of them and give you a chat bot, it's going to be a subpar, worse customer service experience. Air Canada is the laughingstock of the globe. Thank God, I have to say, thank God for Air Canada, because if they hadn't done that total stupidity with the chatbot, which I assume everybody knows about here, is this everybody knows
Maybe
about?
you should just remind us.
What? Oh, so Air Canada, a customer called in and asked the AI chatbot about a bereavement fare because he had to go to a funeral, and the AI chatbot said, whatever, you're entitled to a refund. And then afterwards, the human said, no, you're not entitled to a refund. Smart customer printed out what he was told by the AI customer service, and the court said Air Canada had to honor what the chatbot said. The good part about that mistake, at least for a little while, is it's going to cause a lot of companies to say, uh-oh, we better not just get rid of customer service agents and let people rely only on the AI. I'm hoping it will enforce some better practices. But we're going to see a lot of this, whether it's well-meaning but under-resourced governments that say, oh, well, I don't have anybody to answer the phone, so I'm just going to give you a chat bot, and companies definitely wanting to do this in order to fire workers. I will say, just a side note, Oklahoma, which is a state with a Republican governor, put out its AI strategy, and the centerpiece of the state's AI strategy that came out said, good news, we're going to solve the shortage of workers we have in the private sector. We have a very, very low unemployment rate, and we don't have enough workers in all areas of the private sector. How are we going to do that? We're going to fire the whole public sector. We're going to cut it in half. So they were coming to the issue of AI with an attitude of shrinking the size of government. So long story short, it's questions how we use the tools. And you're 100% right that we really have to be concerned about the use of these tools to fire workers, to eviscerate customer service, to do less. And that's why I think it's so important that we, become educated consumers and researchers and activists demanding that we do better and more. But it is by no means, nothing I'm showing is an inevitability at all. I just think it is cheaper and easier to do it right than it's ever has been before, but that by no means guarantees we will do it right. So.
Thank you for your question. We have two questions at the back, and then we'll come to Jillian.
Oh, there we go. I just want to say thank you for the talk, as well as my first. My first question would be, how do you know that this isn't sort of the bullet in the chamber that will kind of kill democracy in such a way? And as well, how would you sorry, I'm trying to formalize it. To what level of autonomy to what level of autonomy do you trust, should we trust an AI agent to perform sort of moral actions in such a way, in such?
2 questions. Were we taking another one?
No, those were 2 questions. One
Oh.
person, 2 questions,
Oh,
sorry.
one person, 2
The bullet in
questions.
the chamber.
Okay.
And
I
then
got bullet in the chamber and AI agents and the
autonomy.
And autonomy, yes. So depending on what we mean about, so is AI the bullet in the chamber about to kill democracy? I think we have a lot of forces that are putting democracy at risk. And again, there are many different definitions of democracy and whether, depending on what we mean by it and whether we're talking about the desire for representative institutions or self-governance and more direct democracy. And, you know, there are a lot of forces that are working against the survival of our institutions that range from economic inequality to the way the media is relentlessly talking about fear-mongering and in order to sell eyeballs and depressing our trust in institutions. There's a lot going on here that's very hard to unpack. So I am, as I think you heard, hopeful about the possibilities. If the question is whether AI is going to, you know, create so much disinformation and misinformation and deepfakes, et cetera, around our elections, for example, which a lot of people are worried about how it will impact the integrity of our elections. We have seen with every technology throughout history that it is always an arms race. There is some challenge, and we figure out a way to respond, whether it's through better technology or whether it's through law and policy, which we've already seen. So someone did robocalling with fake Biden calls, and the FCC immediately came out and said, no, can't do robocalls. That's been the case for a number of years, and you definitely can't do fake AI Biden robocalls. So there was a response. There are many, many jurisdictions now either having enacted or about to enact some kind of a prohibition against deepfakes. Again, how effective they will be is another matter, but that's why you're seeing schools ask the question of how do we educate people to become more critical consumers of what they're seeing, so that when you see the Pope in the stylish white puffer jacket, you go, maybe that's not the Pope. Maybe that's AI. And when you see Reid Hoffman, fake Reid Hoffman here, the more that we see things like this, the more we will, you know, have to ask questions. And this will get worse before it gets better. If tools like Sora and other tools that we can use to make videos that are so hyper-realistic that you cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is not, it is going to be the Wild West as we learn how to deal with this. My son said to me, and he's 14, he said, I do not know, this was just this week, I do not know what it will be like to get older in a world in which I have no moorings into reality anymore, that I have literally no way to tell what is real. So this is like the revenge of Walter Benjamin. So I don't have a good answer to your question except to say we have to be vigilant, and it's why I think it's so important that we need an agenda around AI and democracy and democratic institutions, none of which should be about AI deciding for itself. I come back to this question of how we as humans and how our human-driven institutions use these tools so that it is not about autonomy for the tools, it's about autonomy for us that is enabled and strengthened through these tools that will be so interesting. So there's no surefire answers to any of this yet, but a lot of great questions.
We have 3 more questions, I think.
You have one there, and then we have Jillian, and then through here. So then I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but we can chit-chat out there after.
Sure. Thank you for the great presentation. I wish I shared your enthusiasm, but we'll see. So the central thesis of your presentation is that democratic institutions are underworked, overworked, under-resourced, ineffective, and AI can help with those problems, and I agree with that. But what if the bigger challenge for democracy is that it's fundamentally incompatible with late-stage capitalism? Small question, right?
Small question.
Or to put it in the context of AI, you know, so like suppose we can do all the things that you are showing, but what else would need to change for democracy to really become revitalized beyond just more efficient government services?
Do you want me to respond, or do you want to?
Go ahead and respond to that. No, we'll take them one at a time. So, sorry, Beth.
So so this will be wholly unsatisfying to a profound and lengthy question. And let me just briefly say a few things. One is that while I focused a lot on political institutions, democracy happens in a lot of places, including in the workplace. And I think issues of worker power and how workers use technology to organize. I will commend to you my colleague's wonderful blog called Power at Work. And my colleague Seth Harris focuses a lot on how AI can help workers become more powerful, number one. Number two, issues of economic inequality, which you are pointing to, which merits a much deeper conversation, and the ways in which we desperately will need an agenda to address the dislocation of workers that will result from AI. There's huge potential with these tools to create new jobs and to create new forms of wealth, as we know, but we will have a transitional period that will be very deliberate and intentional on the part of those late-stage capitalists wanting to fire all the truck drivers and the Uber drivers and the fill-in-the-blank who can be replaced with AI. So this is we need a policy and legal agenda that responds to these issues. And then finally, lastly, I didn't talk as much about it today because I was kindly invited to give a talk in November in which I talked a little bit more about strengthening forms of democratic engagement and participation. I am one of those people who is actually deeply dissatisfied with being contented with representative institutions, and I do think we have the ability to strengthen new forms of true worker power, citizen power, and actual engagement by the public. And it's one of the reasons I alluded very briefly to the fact that I'm concerned about the fact that we are spending way too much time on democratic engagement in ways that's just kind of tinkering at the edges or nice little things where citizens talk to each other. I don't think we can afford to content ourselves with, oh, let's have a nice chat between neighbors, as opposed to asking the question, how do we give power back to ordinary people? And there's a lot about these tools that can actually empower ordinary people, but it is an uphill fight that we have in front of us.
Maybe that's a nice segue for Jillian's question, is my guess.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just wondering if I could ask you to say a little bit about transparency. Not the transparency of government using AI, but rather the transparency that we're facing, that most of the tools that you're talking about are going to be built inside private technology companies. And the nature of the technology is such that we really can't reproduce it in the public sector. So if we think about, for example, developing that chatbot that can help us answer that question, this is better than that, this is, like doing that kind of value-based judgment, we know that those systems are getting tuned inside a private technology company that we just are, I just think we're at a point where we need a new way of thinking about transparency. So if we're going to think about this now heading into government, anyway, just your thoughts on transparency.
Well, I'm very curious. I'd love to know your answer to your own question, having spent time in the belly of the beast, and whether you are hopeful or not. So there are people have been long asking the question with social media before generative AI and machine learning about whether we need a public option, essentially. And now that the price tag is even bigger, I mean, we waited too long to ask this question, and now the cost is even bigger. So the notion that we're going to turn around and spend $100 million on building public AI, I don't know, I think there's a lot of people pushing for it, and I'm really interested to see whether we're going to do that. There's a lot of interest now in smaller models, obviously, and so the opportunity to create public versions of smaller models and what the quality of those will be. I am really curious about this, but I think it's deeply concerning. Again, without discounting the fact that there's lots of things you can do with ChatGPT or Claude or Llama or these commercial tools that make the world a better place, including things like just translating government speak into plain English. It has a great effect, and it doesn't matter that, it's fine that the platforms are commercial. And I'll give you a quick analogy because I did some work with Facebook groups and Facebook communities. Private platform, private spaces, badly run, and yet wonderful things were happening in Facebook communities where people were, giving fellowship and community and meaning and power to one another that were taking place. So I don't want to discount any of that, but I do think that there is some momentum now, and we've seen the dumpster fire, to go back to that phrase, that social media has been. And I think we may be on the precipice of actually being willing to make those investments in public AI, and I would like to see that. I'm not allowed to ask you that back, am I?
You can outside there, for sure. Did you have a question? Yes, right?
Yeah, I want to.
Oh, sorry.
Going to be no more.
I'm used to negative, that's okay.
There's a presumption of integrity, honesty, and courage, particularly like in the higher levels of government. And I think, in the U.S., you can see that happening right now in New York City among some of the witnesses. And I guess my concern is what evidence is there that AI-generated, I'll say answers, will make any substantial policy differences? In particular, are the laws that will be passed, are those going to be beneficial, or will they end up serving the interests of corruption, bribery, and extortion rather than most of the people on the planet?
This is the bullet in another one of the bullet in the chamber questions. So the man's inhumanity to man, late stage capitalism, corruption. We've got a lot of very big challenges and issues. So let me say one thing that will it's responsive but will be unsatisfying, and then one thing that's more responsive. So there's a lot of people working in government who are extremely good people, who are very well-intentioned. And when you talk about things like the state and local situation, when we come to things like, the ability to take out the trash, where's our South African friend here? Our ability to keep the lights on, our ability to take out the trash, our ability to deliver functioning services, these things matter in people's lives. And even in dictatorships, and even in, leaders want to take out the trash because they don't want a revolution on their hands. It suits their authoritarian purposes to have people at least anesthetized enough to let them continue to be in power, repressed enough to be in power. So there are ways in which we can improve lives using these tools and services. When it comes to policymaking, so I do think there's a lot of good to be done before we even trigger some of these very, very difficult issues. And of course, human nature being what it is, there will always be people striving for authority, power over other people who are corrupt, et cetera. And it is, we are always having to fight against that. But I'll give you a quick example here. Come back to that Italian amendments process. In the US right now, when a legislator wants to, use that amendment process to, throw in their little pet project, we have no idea when that's happening. We know who introduced a bill, so day one, these legislators, their name is on it. What happens after that, we have no transparency at all into what happens, and it's totally corrupt. We have the ability, as even Italy is managing to do, talk about corruption, to actually make that process more transparent and more accountable. We're not doing it yet, but we could do that. So there are places where we can chip away at some of these issues and make some of these processes more accountable and more transparent, precisely because we can manage the flow of information more easily. Now, again, we have to want to do that, and if you talk to the Library of Congress, which builds the tools for Congress, they say, oh, we can't do that because we don't want to get in political trouble for this. So somebody has to kick them upside the backside and say, this is a priority to build this, and we're not doing that yet. So it's a problem we need to chip away at, and I do think AI can help with it, even if at the same time it also is putting powerful tools into the hands of the bad guys too.
We'll do two very quick questions. I think there's one already teed up back here, and then Avery, and then we'll...
Hello. First, I want to thank you so much for a very optimistic and informative talk. A lot of what you addressed, I would consider, let's say, the second part of the democratic process, in the sense that a lot of the time I've noticed, especially last 10 years, or actually last 5 years, especially with COVID, there's a huge gap in terms of compartmentalization, where people will be on social media, algorithms put them in very different directions. So they live in very different realities. So even if you were to find a good resource, let's say a CDC study or something like that, they dismiss it out of hand. So I feel like a lot of the tools, they're very useful, but they're useful for a specific type of person who already has a level of trust. So I'm just curious on your thoughts, or if there's any solutions you have ideas of towards addressing the previous part of the problems, where people are having their own realities and they don't really believe or want to interact with anything that contradicts outside of their bubble, and they probably won't even see it. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
A lot of small problems we're solving here. Next time I want to give a talk on something very small. So the echo chamber of the distrust of the other, silos we've created, and how we solve those. I think there are some there are some really interesting experiments actually using AI, and I'm stalling to try to remember the name of the thing I just saw last night, which is using AI to essentially process through large quantities of data to say who is reading what and where people are getting their news from in different places, and helping us to see those differences, and that transparency is kind of really interesting. There's a project out of Japan also called Smart News, which is a commercial company that's trying to do a lot using AI to sort of elevate and break down those echo chambers and sort of say, oh, what are who is reading what and saying what in different places, that I think are quite interesting in terms of what they might do for us. But there's obviously a lot of forces that are arrayed against our effort to break down those silos. Those silos suit, and those extremes suit the political advantages of political parties. And so there are things we need to do to combat that, which may not have anything to do with technology to some extent. So you see reforms like the elimination of first past the post voting, and the effort to kind of bring about ranked choice voting, efforts to create new political parties, efforts to try to move away from political systems that are entrenched in and kind of benefit from and creating that antagonism. So I think there's a lot of different solutions that are, some of them are going to be technological, some of them are going to be political, some of them are about civic education and how we teach the next generation to engage with information, but it's going to be, and then some of it is this question of public forms of media, because as long as the business model of most of these media outlets is about manufacturing outrage to get me to spend more time looking at commercials on their website or on their television station, it's going to be very, very difficult to break out of, if you're these shackles that we've created for ourselves. And I don't think I wish the answer were 42. But I do think there's just a lot we need to do that includes a lot of political reform that can help us decrease the desire for that manufactured outrage and antagonism.
Last question will go to Avery.
Okay, so when I think about the death of democracy, I think about democracy having been eaten alive by corporate lobbying and incredibly well-funded special interest groups. And you've presented so many really exciting use cases for AI here. I did see one of the slides, you said it would reduce the influence of lobbyists. It said that AI would increase constituent engagement and reduce the influence of lobbyists. Could you say more about that? I got pretty excited when I saw that.
I forgot which slide I put that on. I think the idea is that right now, at least, and I'll speak to the US, and I apologize for my myopia and being so US focused in my responses. But I think there is a way in which it's not unique to the US that because of the overwhelming amount of information on an incredible number and growing number of complex and difficult issues, it used to be that when we thought about what used to be called government mandarins, the people with the best information and the best analytical capacity were in government. So they had the best libraries and the best researchers. That is not, fast forward 100 years, that's no longer the case. And you have these institutions, and I will say it has been a systematic effort to actually eliminate these institutions. In the US, where, for example, we got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment. The fact that these support agencies that do research and provide analytical advice are shrinking, that's not an accident. It's not just about the low salaries. There has been a systematic effort to fire and get rid of people. So without spending more time on that, I'll just say that it has created a dependency on the part of politicians who, at least in the US, are spending 50 to 70% of their time on dialing for dollars. How much time does that leave you to learn about climate change, AI, transportation, health, pandemics, blah, 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 fill in the blank? So isn't it very handy when a nifty lobbying group comes up and says, here's your position. A group like ALEC in the United States, who write sample legislation for politicians, and they say, here, introduce this legislation. Boy, how much easier it is if you just give it to me and you've written it for me and I don't have to write it for myself. So the question is whether, with the ability to process information better, quite literally, we become less dependent on the person who just goes, introduce this. And again, lobbyists, to be clear, there are lobbyists on the right, there are lobbyists on the left. Depending on your position, there are good guy lobbyists and bad guy lobbyists. They are essentially just people who provide you with information nicely packaged in a way you can use. So the question is, does it create more ability for people to get smarter, faster on issues for a more diverse array of sources? And I would say the potential is there if we figure out how to do that.
Well, with that, may I just say again, thank you to our speaker and for this inspiring talk, but also this generous and very thoughtful conversation.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I also just want to thank the Faculty of Information for inviting the Schwartz Reisman Institute to co-host this amazing event. And as we move now to a lovely reception and carry on this conversation, I hope you all feel as inspired and optimistic as I do about the potential that we can bring with technology. So thank you very much.